bit into a rhythm. And remarkably, the senators for long, long periods of time sat in their seats, listened attentively. I had a little better break. I'm in the back row, so I could get up and stretch my legs without obstructing. I was very impressed with the House managers. They may have been a little, even as someone who's followed to kind of go through all the facts, and the time sequence was very powerful. And there was a presentation, I think it was technically the second day of the House managers presentation, when Adam Schiff, who really was quite eloquent. I know Adam pretty well, but his that second night, maybe not his last night close, but the second night close, it was electric in the room. Everybody, he had everybody's attention, and maybe he made the most important comments, and this is a paraphrase. He basically addressed mostly our Republican after kind of going through the things, said, come on, guys, who in this room doesn't believe, one, that this guy would do this, put his own personal interest in front of anything else, and two, that he wouldn't do it again if he thought it was going to serve him. And I could tell if we'd been able to vote on witnesses at that moment in time, the result might have been a little bit different.
I wanted to ask you this, Senator. You can't mention senators that you've talked to. You want to keep them confidential. But I got the feeling that on the Republican side of the aisle, except for Mitt Romney, who was courageous in voting for at least one article, I got the feeling that deep down inside, if you had to put them on a lie detector test, there were many Republicans that felt that, yes, he did abuse his office, and that, yes, it was an impeachable offense. Without mentioning names, of course, did you get a sense that maybe 25, 30% of the Republicans felt that way?
I think there were a large number of Republicans who realized the fact pattern was not even repudiated. And then you had this kind of crazy argument from my law professor, Alan Dershowitz, that the president can do anything, which kind of had my head spinning. But I think there were a number of them that said, yeah, he did it, but here was the thing that is the most frustrating. I mean, one is they said, he did it, but don't worry, Mark, after the trial, he'll be a changed man. And they're right, he's worse.
He's worse.
I mean, it's just his, this notion that he was going to be cast in some basis. I mean, it's just not how he operates. And I also still am very anxious to see, and I think we're going to look.
Oh, I think we lost. Did we lose? Oh, darn it.
Vis-a-vis Ukraine, but what about other circumstances? And, the fact that although I should also quickly say that, whether it's John Bolton or now John Kelly's, sudden willingness to tell the truth, I don't know how some of these guys who were in the room and got exposed to this behavior kind of ad nauseum weren't willing more to speak up, even without subpoenas.
Well, Senator, I want to segue, because the Justice Department is it's like a sibling to me.
Yes.
I worked there almost 30 years. What is your take on Bill Barr's actions with respect to the sentencing recommendation of Roger Stone?
Well, Gene, I went to law school but never practiced a day of law, but I've talked to other folks like you, folks who had careers in the Justice Department. I can't find anybody, Democrat or Republican, that can cite any precedents on this. There was one Republican said, well, what about, Eric Holder and the Ted Stevens case years ago? That was a case, though, where there was literally prosecutorial misconduct that they had not given the defense, I think, certain documents, which I think that is not the case. And clearly it wasn't like Barack Obama says, let me go see if we can help this Republican senator. I'm amazed. And I'm frankly, the Barr comments after the Trump tweets seems to me to be too little, too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to clarify the record on Senator Stevens. That indictment was approved by the Republican administration, by the Bush administration.
Right.
Matt Friedrich was the acting assistant attorney general of the criminal division. I worked with him in the U.S. Attorney's Office in EDVA. He approved that indictment. So the charge was filed under Bush 2, but Obama let him, cleared him and dismissed the charges. So anyway, but I wanted to focus on something that you're passionate about, you're a leader on. You're in the efforts involving veteran suicide. Could you tell the listeners what you have been doing on that front?
Well, Gene, this is a real national tragedy. Veteran suicide rate is about almost 2-to-1 over a normal American suicide rate. We're losing about 18 veterans a day to suicide. Some of those, go back to Korean War, many out of the Vietnam War, and then unfortunately even some folks from Iraq and Afghanistan. And of those roughly 17 or 18 vets a day that die, only about 25% of them have had any contact with the Veterans Administration. So what we're trying to do is that I've got some bipartisan legislation that would help link, because there's lots of veterans prevention activities in virtually every community, but how you can kind of link those services more closely to the VA. We've got a really interesting project where the veterans suicide groups prevention groups have got an office now in the headquarters of the Virginia Police Department, because somebody may come in showing signs of willingness to self-harm. And, oftentimes these veterans support services that are working, because unfortunately many of the suicide thoughts go back to their time in the military. And if they can then, hit with someone who's got similar experiences, the savings rate goes up dramatically. So this is really something that's been overlooked for some time. There's a growing recognition of this. There's a lot of good programs that are being started. I was just down at McGuire and the hospital in Richmond, and
right.
They're really stepping up their efforts. I was in Hampton about a month ago, and the Virginia Beach Police Chief has really been great. I've got this legislation with Senator Boozman from Arkansas that has been put into a bigger bill that will get some more money out into the community to link and make these linkages. It's almost like there's lots of groups that want to help people who are with these kind of problems, but they're not all talking to each other, and they're not talking very much, particularly to the veterans groups. So we're trying to provide some linkage there.
Well, you gave an interview, I think, to Channel 8 News, and you mentioned that we lose about 17 veterans a day in this country. Do you know what percentage of those 17 veterans who pass, is there any relationship to suicide? Do you have a percentage on that?
Oh, no. What I'm saying is we have 17 veterans a day we lose to suicide.
Oh, that's why I wanted to ask.
That
is amazing.
In terms of veterans dying a day, I don't know the number, but it's much more. But I'm talking 17 veterans a day with suicide. That's just a tragic number.
Oh, Senator, when we were reading this, my wife Diane and I was going, that can't be 17 suicides a day. And we also read the literature you have that it's because of something they may have done or something they heard or saw, and it never leaves them. The other thing is you have a statistic in your website that 20% of veterans who took their lives, only 20% had reached out for help. So you got 80% who don't reach out for help. Is that addressed in any of their legislation?
Well, that's what we're trying to do. Is there are a lot of suicide prevention services that the VA can hook you up with, but these veterans who are committing suicide really aren't in the VA system at all. So if somebody's going to a VA hospital and are receiving veteran services, and they've got a much better chance of, and they can express their concern of getting hooked up with some help. A lot of these vets, most vets don't access the VA system on a regular basis, and we're trying to say, hey, through signage, through web activities, even old-fashioned billboards, hey, have you served our country and you're having dark thoughts, contact this website or make this phone number. And we're trying to reach out in the faith community. We're trying to reach out, law enforcement. Somebody comes in on some mental health issue and the person looks potentially dangerous. Let's get that person, connected with somebody. If they're a veteran, connected to somebody at the VA, because as you said, a lot of times some of these mental health issues will go back to kind of some experience they had during the military. And, at least the literature and the scientific literature shows if they can get a counselor who's also a vet, there's a bond there. And I say this is someone who didn't serve, but I know, for example, my dad, who was a World War II Marine on Iwo Jima. I mean,
wow.
He never wanted to talk about anything in World War II
oh my God.
until he was about 80, and that's all he wanted to talk about then. But, he had an extraordinarily special bond with other people who'd served.
Wow. Well, Senator, your time is precious. I want to end with two other key issues, military housing and election security. Could you just comment on those both?
Sure, real quickly on this. On military housing, this is another one I've been involved in for years, and I think we're going to get it fixed, but it really kind of breaks your heart. 22 years ago, I think it was, during the Clinton administration, we outsourced military housing to 7 private companies. We thought, well, that might improve the housing and they'll do a better job of running the housing. We gave these companies 50-year leases, but really put very little oversight in place on how these companies were going to run these houses, where a lot of times, the military families come in, they're generally young, they come in for a 2-year rotation, so they're not permanent tenants. And these housing companies, the military's done a crummy job of overseeing them. The military families are usually, you may have a spouse deployed, and so they're kind of struggling. And these houses, some are just despicable. Mold, rodents, leaking roofs. And, we say we want to do stuff for our military men and women who serve. Well, one of the things we're going to do is make sure their families, their kids, aren't living in some rat-infested, mold-infested apartment. So we've, again, worked on this bipartisan. We've got new legislation. But I think this is one of the ones that, we've changed the law. We've put a tenant bill of rights in, but it's going to keep constant pressure. I'm going to be down at Fort Lee, outside of Petersburg, I think this coming week. That's great. And trying to bring pressure as well.
That's great. And election security.
Well, Gene, I know this is something you care about as well. Are our elections safer than they were in 2016? Absolutely. Are the Russians and the other adversaries going to come at us again? Absolutely. And while the folks at DHS and the FBI and the CIA are trying to do their jobs are undermined on a daily basis when you've got this White House who still tries to deny this vulnerability. And, the fact that we couldn't even, after the impeachment trial, I tried to come to the floor and get a bill passed that should be a no-brainer. I basically just said, hey, let's make absolutely clear, if a foreign government tries to intervene, help a campaign or offer dirt on a political opponent, that the proper response is don't say thank you to the foreign government, call the FBI.
Right.
And you know what? You'd be surprised that Mitch McConnell blocked it.
Wow. Hey, Senator, I will see you tonight at the gala, right?
See you tonight.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Diane and I will be there. I'll come by and shake your hand, and we'll talk at the table. How's that?
Very good. And, Gene, thank you for continuing the fight, and thank you for making sure on this station that we've got a variety of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Keep it up.